The Formula One driver market has been moving on apace. Hot on the heels of Valtteri Bottas being confirmed for 2020 at Mercedes, we hear that Esteban Ocon will be racing for Renault next year. That's now been confirmed. Obviously, those two decisions interconnected. I'm joined by Scott Mitchell to talk about the significance of the Ocon to Renault move. Now, there's two ways of looking at it for Esteban Ocon, isn't there? Because on the one hand, he's got what he wants. He's got a Formula One race seat again. But it's not with the world champion team. It's with a team that's struggling in the midfield at the moment. So it's like Christmas has come, but he's got his second best present.
It's a very good way of putting it. Because he went into the summer break knowing that he was one of two options for Mercedes, and Toto Wolff had been really talking him up and explaining why he was such a valid option. And I know that we've talked about the merits of Ocon going to Mercedes, and I know there's a lot of viewers and readers of Autosport that think the same and think that Ocon should be in that car. It's not quite worked out that way for him, but I think it's a little bit like how Daniel Kvyat's viewing his being snubbed by Red Bull, because he can't really get too greedy. Kvyat's point is, well, Red put me back in F1 this year with Toro Rosso. I wouldn't even be in F1 without them, so I can't really complain about their decision. And I think Ocon is a little bit similar, because, yeah, it's not the seat he wanted, but he could be missing out of F1 entirely. You go away for a season, you have a sabbatical, it can turn into much more than a sabbatical. So I think he needs to accept the fact that it hasn't worked out with Mercedes. Doesn't stop him joining a much bigger team in the future. Renault's still a works team. There's every chance they'll be at the front of the midfield next season if they do a bit better than this year. So, yeah, second best Christmas present, but still one he's probably going to be quite happy with.
As you say, Renault is a works team, but that's one of the reasons why our expectations are higher than. We're not expecting them this year to be battling with the top three, but we did expect them to be at the front of the midfield. So, do you think Esteban will have a little bit of a question mark in his mind as to exactly what team he's going into? He does know the team of old, but it's a team with a lot of potential, but this progression towards the front we've been anticipating with all the investment and recruitment and facilities, it's stuttered a bit this year, hasn't it?
Well, there's a lot of factors involved that does make it quite tricky, because he'll have the expectation of a French driver in a French works team. That shouldn't be underestimated. That's probably one of the plus points for getting him in the team, but it is also a double-edged sword, because then expectation rises. He's going into a team where Daniel Ricciardo, an absolute top-line operator, has been for a season, so he's moulded the team around him now, big money signing, so there's that to contend with. And then there's the uncertainty over what Renault's going to be as a competitive prospect. So those three factors, I think, make it a little bit trickier for Ocon to judge exactly what to expect next year, because he's going to come in a little bit rusty. We saw, I think he's in a slightly higher level of operator than Antonio Giovinazzi at Alfa Romeo, but we saw with Giovinazzi that you have that time out, you have that little bit of rust develop in terms of your racing craft and skill set. So we don't really know how quickly he's going to sort of get back in the groove at the start of next season, and once he does that, how quick's the car going to be? Is he going to be struggling to match his teammate? Is he going to have a massive weight of expectation and pressure when he goes to Paul Ricard next year for the French Grand Prix? Renault's home race, his home race. If they're not absolutely smashing that midfield battle, there's going to be loads of questions, loads of negative attention. So just because he's not got that Mercedes drive doesn't mean that Ocon gets a maybe like under the radar return to F1. I think he'll find quite quickly that the pressure will mount if Renault doesn't make a big step from this year.
You touched on it there. He's going to look across the garage, and there is going to be Daniel Ricciardo. Now, he's jumped out of the frying pan in that he's not going to be up against Lewis Hamilton. That's maybe the one benefit of not having a Mercedes one, because that's a hell of a yardstick to be measured against. But he's got Daniel Ricciardo, who, while isn't Lewis Hamilton, he's still an extremely good driver, as you said, very, very well established. So that's now Ocon's battle, isn't it? He needs to go in there a year behind Ricciardo and show he can at least match him, if not outperform him. So that's very, very, very difficult, and adds to the challenge. Even if the car's better than expected, he's still going to have Ricciardo.
Yeah, and it's like whatever level that car's at, he's not going to be number one, not on any given weekend, because he might outpace Ricciardo one weekend, and then they might get to the next weekend and Ricciardo's 2 temps up the road and he can't touch him, because Ricciardo is that level of operator. But I've seen comments from readers, viewers in very different areas on Twitter, Facebook, everywhere, questioning whether Ocon is really that level. So basically their point of view is that, well, he didn't quite get one over on Perez, and Perez is a very good midfield driver, but he's not absolute top of the line. So is this guy good enough? So he goes in, I think, with a bit to prove. That was one of the major question marks, I think, for Mercedes, was we'd only seen him in the midfield, and he hadn't really established himself over a driver who'd obviously been rejected by McLaren a few years ago, been rejected by most of the manufacturer teams on the grid. So not very easy for Ocon at all. And in going up against Ricciardo, he replaces a driver, Nico Hülkenberg, who is as good as you can be without being a podium finisher in F1. And he hasn't been able to be on Ricciardo's level this season. Been quite comfortably outclassed in qualifying, hasn't beaten him in a straight fight in the races very often, maybe once or twice. So it's been really hard for Hülkenberg, who's established, was in that team for a while. Ocon coming in cold, Ricciardo's going to be a really hard person to beat.
And what about Nico Hülkenberg now? Obviously, he's been with Renault for a few years. He's now looking for another drive. So what are the odds of Hülkenberg still being on the grid in 2020?
Well, I think I'd put it as if Hülkenberg wants to join Haas, he'll be in a Haas next season. That seems to be the strongest option. The fact he was giving enough a hint he's not going to wait very long before he commits. He said in about 2 weeks he'll probably know what he wants to do, which I think rules out him waiting and seeing if he might sneak into Red Bull or something like that, because we know that there's a bit of a question mark about who they put alongside Max Verstappen next year. But that's his best chance of a competitive drive. I don't think he'll wait for it. I think it's a long shot anyway. Maybe he could try and steal Giovinazzi's Alfa Romeo seat. I think he was quite good at turning up at that team when it was known as Sauber. But I think Haas is his best option. Günther Steiner's told us that he wants Hülkenberg in the car. He's on the shortlist. It's him versus Grosjean now, basically, for the seat up against Magnussen. They've got a bit of needle, Magnussen and Hülkenberg. He said he'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. And I think Haas represents his best chance. And honestly, I think if he wants it, I think he probably gets it.
Not such a bad place to be, Haas. Troubles this season, but look how well they went last year. And if they can get on top of the car and understand what's been holding them back, it's a good midfield team to be in. So still hope for Nico Hülkenberg in the future.